This is my 1990 Mazda Miata. And while I drove a couple of family cars while in school, it is the first car I ever purchased. Let me share our story. After finishing school, I moved to California and after a little relaxing, secured a lucrative position in distribution. With all of the tips, my new income, more than my first real job would eventually produce, quickly accumulated, and I decided that I was now in the market for my first car. My lifelong fascination with Porsches led me to a red 1974 Porsche 914, very similar to the one I remembered riding in with my uncle as a child when they were new. I shrewdly negotiated a good price from a 20-year-old that was in need of cash, much to the dismay of his father, who had invested countless hours and money into the car. Alas, the deal fell through at the very last minute when the car had trouble passing California emissions. After this ordeal, I decided to look for something newer. Having subscribed to Motor Trend since I was 16, I remembered how excited the editors were when the so-called Japanese Lotus Elan had come to America for the 1990 model year. I found this particular car, a 1990 base model with only 48,000 miles, after a short search and met the owner for a test drive. The seller had purchased it from the original owner in 1995 with 30,000 miles on it and had installed several upgrades, including an aftermarket exhaust, a couple of structural bars to stiffen up the chassis, and, most significantly, a set of alloy wheels from a 1995 special edition. We were driving the twisty mountain roads of the San Francisco Bay Area when the seller shared that he was simply making room for his new ride, a 1987 Porsche 911. In other words, my dream car. The same series of Porsche of which I had multiple posters, tracked prices of for several years, and had test-driven multiple models of as I considered my purchase options. I will never forget what he said next. Sure, the 911 is nice and quite a bit faster, but if I'm being honest about it, the Miata is a lot more fun to drive. At the time, I simply blew it off as someone trying to sell their car. We completed the purchase a few days later, and I promptly drove it from San Francisco to Santa Cruz along the very scenic and famous Highway 1. I got so carried away that I had to call into work using a payphone to let them know I'd be arriving late for the very first time. My manager was very understanding. A year and some months later, I was off to move to Wisconsin. I packed up the car with what fit and drove cross-country through the desert in late July. No air conditioning, 100 and something degrees. A couple of jobs later, and I had enough money to upgrade to something closer to my dream, a Porsche. My friend Pam, who had been so enthralled with the Miata since the very first morning we met at work, enthusiastically bought it from me. She pledged to take good care of the car. The Porsche was a lot of fun, made fantastic noises, and was a much more serious car than my old Miata. Over the next decade, I cycled through many other cars, each one of them significantly faster and more expensive than my Miata. And while I loved all of them, I kept thinking about what the seller had shared during my initial test drive. Pam and I continued to keep in touch through all of my moves around the country, and each time we got together, she would bring the Miata, highlight any maintenance items or upgrades she had done, and insist I take it out for a drive. What a joy. I eventually moved to Denver after selling my most recent Porsche and BMW, replacing them with just one practical car when Pam reached out to see if I could help her with the description of the Miata as she was ready to sell it. After agreeing to help, I woke up the next day and let her know I'd like to buy it back. Who gets to buy back their very first car, especially one that was so much fun? My friend Jeff took it in for some maintenance prior to me flying to Wisconsin and picking it up. It was time for another road trip. Reunited, I enjoyed driving around Denver for a couple of years. As always, the Miata, 30 years old, continued to reside in the safety of my garage while my new car suffered outdoors. I eventually shipped it to North Carolina, which has its own share of twisty mountain roads to enjoy. My little Miata remains the most fun you can have driving a car. That said, it's getting close to time to sell it now, 24 years after originally buying it. I just need to find someone that will get as much enjoyment out of its simple setup as I and each of her previous owners have. Zoom, zoom.